engagement in this lecture series. I'd like to thank first Jeremy and Antia, our colleague from the University of A Coruña, for preparing this lecture series and settling all the technical difficulties that we encountered in the process. I would also like to thank all the colleagues from EuMIGS for their support and for their presence. I see many of them here on my computer. And I would also like to thank, of course, Asuncion Fresnoza, who is an esteemed colleague from the University of Brussels, the Free University of Brussels. We at CEDEM, at the Center for Ethnicity and Migration at the University of Liège, are very strongly connected with the Free University of Brussels. We've been spending the last 25 years working together, exchanging, and Asuncion is among the new generation of leading scholars at ULB, and we've worked together. Personally, I've worked with Asuncion in the Belgian Association of Political Science. And Asuncion is both a senior lecturer at the University of Brussels, but she's also a permanent researcher at the National Fund for Scientific Research, which is a common point that we share. We're both researcher and teacher. And her research center is the Laboratory of Anthropology of Contemporary World at the Free University of Brussels. She's been working on migration issues and especially in the Europe-Asia social space. And she's been very much interested in countries like the Philippines, Thailand, and she also did research in various European settings, including France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Since 2018, she's been coordinating a master, the master program called Transnational Migration, which is an Erasmus Mundus program. And she has published extensively on these questions. One of the forthcoming book she's prepared, she has signed is Situated Mixedness: Understanding Migration-Related Intimate Diversity in Belgium, as well as another book to be quoted, which is a book published in 2022, which is called Tangled Mobilities: Places, Affects, and Personhood Across Social Spheres in Asian Migration. So you see that she's been very much concerned with the circulation and transnational connections, especially through Asian families between Europe and Asia, and different countries in Asia. She is also coordinating several research projects, among others the BelMix project, which focuses on the mobility of Belgian Asian couples, and the project Aspire, which examine the decision-making of migrants and re-migrants originating from Asia. So this is only a part of the very flourishing activity of Asuncion. I thank her very much for joining us today, and her talk will actually be about materiality, sociality, and temporality of investigator-participant relations. The subtitle is Reflexive Insights from a Migrant Woman Researcher. So from the title, you already see that Asuncion will lead us into these very important connections between personal experience, research experience, and how to treat them in the research process. Thank you very much, Asuncion. You now have the floor for this introductory lecture of this seminar. And yes, thank you again.
Thank you, Hassan and Jeremy. Sorry for the background noise because there are works outside. So I will try my best to speak loudly. But if you don't hear me well, please do not hesitate to send a message in the chat, and I will do my best to speak louder. So I will share my screen right now. Yeah, do you see the first slide of my PowerPoint? Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. This is really a great pleasure and honor for me to be here with you and share with you my points of view and my experiences as a migrant woman researcher. And I will be focusing on three aspects of reflexivity in my case, which is materiality, sociality, and temporality. So you can see in this first slide a map and some, arrows. These are the countries where I moved, I migrated. I was born in the Philippines. You will see there in the map, a country in Southeast Asia. My first migration was in Japan. And this migration was driven by my interest to my own personal history of migration that I will share with you later, where I also studied there a master program in sociology studying Japanese migration before World War II, specifically migration from the prefecture of Okinawa, a subtropical archipelago at the southern tip of Japan. And after that, I moved to Europe, first in France, where I did my master in the field of anthropology in migration and interethnic relations, during which I studied Filipino migrant entrepreneurship in Paris, and then pursue my PhD research on transnational family dynamics of Filipino migrant women. And then after I moved to Germany, to follow my husband, who is a researcher in the field of biology. So you could see the tanglement between personal and the scientific. And then after that, arrived in Belgium, where I did my second postdoc and where I found a permanent position later. And before that, I also moved partially to the Netherlands, where I did my third postdoc between 2016 and 2017. So you could see that my research background is filled with mobilities and a lot of movements. I don't include other short movements here, but just focus on migration experiences. And I'm talking right now through this vantage point of being a migrant, a woman, a mother, a spouse, and other identities. So you can imagine that this lecture will be, the foundation will be these research experiences, this positionality of mine, and hoping that we could together reflect afterwards about reflexivity, positionality, and subjectivity. So before moving on to my reflexive exercises, I would like just to visit rapidly. It's just a short state of the art on reflexivity in qualitative research that I examined when I was collaborating with a young scholar in Asia, when we co-write together an article on our reflexive exercise and our experience with Thai migrant women, me in Belgium and him in Hong Kong. So this is not, overall review of the literature, so please forgive me if I overlook some of the key references. So here we could see that the literature on reflexivity in qualitative research that I focus on in this particular presentation presents the different perspectives and approaches that we could find already when we would like to do reflexivity. First, the insider-outsider perspective. So when I was a student, master student, like many of the young people here today, I came to know the insider-outsider perspective, which actually I adopted when I did my doctoral study in France. This kind of dichotomic perspective, what are my similarities in terms of identities with the migrant women I work with, what are the differences of identities that I don't share with them as being an outsider, how all these identities interact during my data collection with them. So it has been criticized, this perspective. It's not perfect, but for young scholars, young researchers like me at that time, it was very useful in looking at the limitations of my study. And then we have the so-called studying up approach, particularly in anthropology by Nader, popularized by Nader. It's like researchers tried to study social groups that are in lower social class positions than them, And of course, there are also many challenges about this kind of approach, like how could we reduce this big social gap between the researchers and the participants when at the very starting point, the gap is already very wide. And then more recent, there's the working hyphen perspective or hyphen-based approaches. You could see here the last three approaches here. Working the hyphen focus on not only on the researcher-participant relationships, power dynamics, but also on the researcher's links with the context where she, he, or they are enmeshed. So these two kind of focus. And then McDonald in 2020, also inspired by this hyphen-based approach, introduced this focus on self, other relations. Usually, she argues that we tend to focus on self-other when we are talking about power dynamics in research process. The other we tend to ignore, and this other, the in-betweeners, like what we call gatekeepers, volunteers, etc., have been also playing a role in research process, in data collection, in knowledge production. So we should not ignore them when we are doing reflexive work. And then we have the so-called fore hyphen spaces introduced by Conleaf and Karuna Nayaki in 2013. They still focus on the researcher and participant relationships in four ways: insiderness and versus outsiderness, similarities versus differences, engagement versus distance, political activism versus active neutrality. So all these approaches that I presented here, not all are here, of course, shows this interest on the sociality or relationality when we are doing reflexive exercise, and also especially...
Aber ja, ich bin drin.
Sorry, there's the sound at the back.
Yeah, someone has his microphone on, so please, in order to allow the presentation, please turn your microphone off. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, there is this wide preoccupation about sociality, relationality, speciality of field experiences, particularly when we are doing reflexive exercises. And what my colleague and I observe is this overlooked aspect of materiality of field experiences, temporality of reflexive experiences that I would try to share with you during this presentation. So before I move on, maybe we could take a look at rapidly of this interesting concept of reflexivity based on my vantage point as an Asian migrant woman researcher and based on my own trajectory as a researcher. So I present with the Bourdieusian sense of objectivation. When I was starting my academic research career, it was very famous, this concept, and I learned from those people, researchers who form me as a researcher right now, this is very important in sociological research, that we need to establish a kind of objective distance. Like, for example, after we did our field work, we need to take a moment, go out of the field and make this kind of self-reflexivity to think about the limitations of our data, what transpired during the research process, which I did after my research during my doctoral study, to what they say objectivize my research experiences and data. But of course, this concept of objectivation has been widely criticized, particularly by feminist researchers and scholars, philosophers of science that I will mention in a few minutes, that there is no such kind of total objectivation, particularly in social sciences and qualitative research. So that is one meaning of reflexivity that I have been understood as a researcher, being formed in different social contexts. So in the Philippine context or in Japan, these contexts have been widely influenced by the Anglo-Saxon epistemology, and I was exposed to this kind of schools of thought. So at my early career, I understood that, yeah, I need really to do objectivation in the Bourdieusian sense. And then the second definition that I came up with, reflexivity, it was during my collaboration with Herbert Richung, a sociologist based now in Monash University in Malaysia. And based on our comparison with our personal experiences in the field, we define reflexivity as a critical introspection and contemplation on how our multiple social identities shape our access to interactions and relationships with our study participants, and with other social actors. So I will give you more concrete examples later on. So I emphasize here the critical, because it's not only about contemplating on what really happened during the data collection and analysis, but really even confronting ourselves, what happened really, what are the advantages, disadvantages of being a researcher, what are the limitations, the challenges we encountered during the fieldwork. Third one is by Gimignani and colleagues, published work in 2023, saying that that reflexivity is a reflection on the relationship between the constitution of knowledge, constitution of the researcher, and the inquiry process. So almost the whole process of knowledge production. And then we have the Hinton and colleagues definition of reflexivity, which I think very interesting and innovative, because the first two definitions that you can see here is more really on the micro level, focusing on us, the researcher, and our interpersonal relations, interactions with our informants or study participants. But here in her definition with her colleagues, a process of decentering by distancing our research from well-established ideas while developing alternative ones. It's like a definition more at the macro meso level that provide us more tools on how to do reflexive work. So if we do the micro level reflexivity, focusing on micro interactional relationships, interpersonal relationships, then we could also connect it and do this kind of reflexivity on how, for example, categories, terms, concepts that we use during data collection, where do they came from? Are they imposed categories that we just reproduce during the process? And what are the alternatives we could offer to counter this, some kind of hegemonic power, institutional imposition of ideas, and sometimes putting people, minoritized people, in boxes. So these are just a few salient definitions of how I understand reflexivity based on my own trajectory as a researcher with migration background. So how could we do reflexivity in a concrete way? There are a lot of ways that we could find in the literature. And this term, positionality, always comes out when we are reading these studies, books, articles. What do we mean by positionality? Me as a researcher, I understood it as a social locations, different stances, for example, at the micro level, in the family, being a daughter or being a mother, being a sister, all the gendered expectations, obligations that are included in this location. At the meso level also, at the national or social level, as a citizen in one particular country, etc. So we need to understand what are our different locations based on intersecting, overlapping identities based on gender, age, social class, etc. I understood it also as the process of taking a stand inspired from the standpoint theory by US-American philosopher Sandra Harding, who wrote this influential book in 1986, The Science Question and Feminism, valorizing the voices, the perspectives, and viewpoint of marginalized people, women in particular, specifically women. And here it's taking a stand, taking a vantage point of people. Harding advances this idea that marginalized people's voices or marginalized people's position put them in a location that, a privileged location that give them a kind of, how do you say, access to concrete realities of everyday life. They could easily, for example, craft research questions, identify problems, issues at stakes in societies at large because of their very own social locations, their own vantage point. So here it is, positionality is the process of taking a stand based on our experiences, identities, biography, as what EuMIGS Lecture, if I pronounce well, and colleagues said in their book in 2023, based on our actual situation and also emotions, among others. I highlighted here experiences in identities because these are two key terms that pop out when we are looking for the definition, meanings of subjectivity. And most often, subjectivity is interchangeably used with the term identities. It's our sense of self. Could be being gendered, our gendered people being classed based on their social class belonging. And then based on the definition by Ellis and Flaherty, it is also the contextually situated lived experiences of individuals. So positionality and subjectivity here are intricately related to each other. It's very difficult to disentangle them when we are doing reflexive exercise about our fieldwork experiences and other experiences when we are doing qualitative or quantitative study in the social sciences. So positionality, why it is also important that we position ourselves in a context. So I evoke here the work of Donna Haraway about situated knowledges, advancing the idea that there's no such thing as total objectivity, and there's only partial objectivity because what we are explaining, what we are writing, for example, in the field of research, is informed by our own experiences, our background, our perspectives, etc. So we need, when we are positioning, we are situating knowledges produced by us, reproduced by us as researcher. So this is very important. Another works that inform my reflexive exercises that I will share soon with you is this concept of agential realism by another US-American philosopher, Karen Barad, who is expert in quantum physics. According to her, human subjects are neither outside observers of apparatuses, and apparatuses here, for her, is the boundary-making processes. And she said that, so human subjects are actually, and the observers are tangled with each other. It's difficult to draw the line between them. We need to analyze their relationships, power relationships, through this perspective of agential realism. So I would like to apply this perspective in my reflexivity. And also draw from this interesting perspective by Crenshaw, the so-called intersectionality that theorized identity and oppression. I am perfectly aware that this perspective, this approach has been crafted for to visibilize the marginalization of Black women in the US context, and that borrowing it to apply in different contexts may have a lot of limitations. But I believe that adapting intersectionality in reflexivity can help us, like in my case, minority women, migrant women, will help me understand how my different identities, multiple identities, shape the research processes that I experience. So here, Crenshaw focuses on the gender, race, class trial, but in my reflexive exercises, I will try to go beyond this trial by adapting two other approaches developed by Leslie McCall, 3 approaches of intersectionality. I will particularly focus on intercategorical, that focus on the existent salient identities like gender, race, class, trial, and intracategorical, focusing on neglected categories. So all this application, intersectionality perspectives on one side from Crenshaw and McCall, and agentic realism from Barad, together applied to reflexivity. My colleague Chung and I developed this approach called agentic intersectionality that would allow us to visibilize the temporal dimension of reflexivity, of field research experiences of us as researcher. So it recognizes the movement of the self, us, the other participants, gatekeepers, and other actors that we met during fieldwork, and also the social at large during the research process. So it will identify the way researcher participants' relations evolve through time, the multiple identities that intersect at different stages of reflexivity, particularly in research. So empirically speaking, I will present my illustration of reflexivity informed by these perspectives to discuss more with you about the 3 concepts of positionality, subjectivity, and of course, reflexivity. So the first study reference that I would like to share with you is from my doctoral research from 2005 to 2008, focusing on the transnational family dynamics of Filipino lone migrant mothers in France, separated from their families in the Philippines. And these mothers are concentrated in the domestic work sector in this country. My field site was Ile-de-France region in France, the Metro Manila region, and surrounding provinces in the Philippines. I had 90 participants during this research. So the materiality of reflexivity, what it is. I would like to share with you how I observe, what I observed during this research, how, for example, presence and photographs impacted my rapport, my relationships with my participants. Presence, bringing presence to their families back home, softened the relationship with them, showing the photographs of the migrant mothers I met in France to their families when I met them there, provided us a platform, a site where we could discuss about the impact of family separation related to maternal migration. So we usually ignored the material dimension of reflexivity of our research. But during this study, I realized that when we're doing reflexive exercise, we also need to pay attention to these taken for granted objects filled with meanings. Why I offered presence when I met the families? Because in the Philippine context, in the socio-cultural ways of living there, when you are coming from abroad or from a far-away country, you offered a small object. Something, it could be food or some little keychain. We call it pasalubong. It's vested with meaning, like you would like to reinforce your relationship, already established relationship with people, or you would like to start an interesting, more solid relationship with people, which I find very useful during my fieldwork. Another material dimension that I would like to share with you is the impact of the material research data gathering tools. So at that time in the 2000, there was no modern mobile phone yet with many apps and other technological tools that we could use during data collection. And I used this small digital recorder at that time, which was like almost the same size as mobile phone, the first former model of the now mobile phone. You can see here it's very small, width is 4 centimeter, length is 9.4 centimeter. And then on the left side of this slide, you could see my interview guide in the Filipino language. At the very beginning, I printed this guide and brought it with me during the first interviews with a few participants, and I observed that it disrupted the fluidity of our conversations. So I decided to invisibilize this research tool by memorizing this interview guide and make the conversation more natural. So I also observed that when you are conversing, exchanging with these informants, they tend to start maybe in my interview guide from the last part of the themes that I put there or from the middle. But by memorizing the interview guide, they could start anywhere, and I could always, put our flow of conversations on the right track because I knew well the themes and sub-themes, specific questions that I wrote in my interview guide. About the digital recorder, because of its small size, I observed that informants during my conversations, recorded interviews, they tended to forget the presence of digital recorder and engage in a more, natural way of talking, exchanging with me. So these are the material dimension of my reflexivity that I thought would not be important. But looking back after my PhD research at that time, I came to the conclusion that the materiality of field research must be included in our self-reflexivity. Regarding the social and temporal dimension, we can see here the different identities that I mobilized during my fieldwork in France and in the Philippines. This is also show the speciality of my reflexive work, that identities that work in one national context would not work in another context. So I would not, because I think it's already 12:51, so I need to accelerate and we can discuss this later, just to show you that it's really different identities in different contexts. The second study reference I would like to share with you is my postdoc research in Belgium from 2012 to 2016 on the case of children and childhood in Filipino-Belgian and Thai-Belgian families. And you could see in these pictures the two key sites where I carried out my ethnographic observations within these immigrant populations in Belgium. So I will now focus only on the social and temporal dimensions of this research, which is also the two dimensions important in my reflexive exercise. The material aspect, the materiality, I will not discuss because at this point when I was doing this research, I already knew well that material objects, material research tools have strong impact on power dynamics, researcher-participant relationship. So I already invisibilized all those things like, interview guide, fieldwork notebook, using at this time more modern digital recorder, but not the mobile phone. So I will just focus on these dimensions. So this study has 3 phases. So before the data collection, when I was crafting the research project, applying for funds, I observed that you can see the scientific is personal. How my own research background, personal situation, and intersecting identities all played an important role in crafting this research project for funding applied for an FNRS postdoctoral funding. So research background. After a first postdoc on children's experiences of family reunification in Filipino families, because during my doctoral study, I focused on family separation, and first postdoc was on family reunification, I specifically focused on the perspective of children. So I was introduced to this field of children and childhood studies, which actually informed my interest, like, okay, why not propose a project on children growing up in mixed families. And here you can see that my personal situation as a third generation, part of the third generation of Japanese migration to the Philippines. I am a granddaughter of a couple, Japanese-Filipino couple, who was produced by a grand migration of Japanese to the Philippines before World War II. And they produced 7 children, and one of these children is my mother. You could see my mother there, who gave birth to me. And then later on, I found myself in the same situation as my grandparents, being in a mixed situation, conjugal situation, and being a mother of ethnically mixed children. So all this informed also my interest to study conjugal mixedness, family mixedness, children growing up, how do they construct their identities in this ethnically mixed setting. And then my intersecting identities here, the most salient were migrant, mother, spouse identities. But at that time, when I was elaborating my research, I did not really consider yet my researcher identity, how it would impact my research and rapport, interactions and relationship with my participants later on. During the second phase, I observed that there was a shifting relation of power and positionality. So during the first sub-phase of my study, just accessing the target population, the migrant mother spouse was still salient, but the researcher identity was very useful for me to get the support of gatekeepers who connected me to potential participants to my study, who encouraged certain participants to support my study. And then during the second sub-phase, conducting observations and interviews, it's now the participants who hold this power because they are the one who decide when, where, how could I interview them, what amount of data, information they could share with me at that time. And so I found also myself adjusting to the participants. I also would like to mention that participants themselves during my studies that I mentioned a while ago and this one also positioned themselves during our interactions, like Filipino domestic workers in France also introduced to me their other identities as professionals in the Philippines, not only as migrant mother, as association leaders in France, showing me their multifaceted identities. It's the same for Thai women, Filipino women in couple with Belgian men. So I see this shift during the second sub-phase of the data gathering phase. The last phase is the data analysis in writing. We could sometimes think like, oh, the field work is finished, so power relations done, no interaction with participants, and no intersecting identities. But actually, if we again do more reflexive exercise in-depth reflexive practice, we could understand that, in my case, my identity as woman migrant, like my informants, also informed the way I write. Aware of the negative stereotypes about these women that sometimes led to discriminatory attitudes toward them. I make sure that I present them not as, the stereotype that we encountered in the society where they live. So I make sure that this is also countered with empirical data showing that the homogenizing stereotypes are not really true, but there are more heterogenized experiences, identities of these women. And of course, the researcher identity is very salient with my research background, training, language skills. All this influence how I analyze the data and how, what perspectives, analytical lens I would use, and how I would write the paper. And during this process, it is the moment that I had a close encounter with scientific institutions, particularly the funders, the FNRS, for example, my university at that time, the ethical and data protection regulations they are following that I need to respect. And recently we have this implementation of the general data protection regulations of the European Union. And we need to be aware of all this. And it is has been informing our research practices and also the research process that we have been engaging to. So to end this presentation rapidly, some take-home message from this first-hand experience as migrant woman researcher. The first one is material tools of research influence the quality and quantity of collected empirical data. We need to include this material dimension in our reflexive work, take them into account in our positionality. I did not mention about the way we also introduced the way we choose the clothes we wear when we are doing fieldwork, but it could be in another presentation. But it's just one example of how materiality of research can also influence the power relations with our participants and other social actors when we are gathering data. Second take-home message is intersecting identities, positionality of researcher and study participants, and their power dynamics constantly shifted from one temporal context to another. So when we are saying that we need to do reflexivity, but the question is, yeah, what point of the research process we need to do the reflexivity? Is it before we do the project, when we are writing the project, during the time that we are accessing the field, or during the data collection itself with our direct interaction with the participants? And then after the data collection, when we are analyzing the data and writing the results in different platforms, different forms, for example. So this is very important for our reflexivity. Third, researchers have no monopoly of knowledge and power. And based on my own experience, yeah, gatekeepers have power, particularly in my case during the entry phase, like trying to reach for potential participants. And then participants, they hold certain power because they are the one who could decide how they would open the door for us. Would it be a wide open door or just a partial open door so that we could access their life universe? So this is another thing that we need to keep in mind. And fourth, the changing relational dynamics between researcher and participants are embedded in broader relations of power. When I discussed a while ago about the impact of scientific institutions when we are analyzing data, when we are protecting the anonymity, private life of our participants, we are taking into account data protection regulations, the ethical aspects of research. So all these are also part of self-reflexivity. And last but not the least, the agentic intersectionality framework that I just adapted to visibilize not only the social, the material, but also temporal dimensions of field research. It facilitates, this framework facilitates our understanding of these temporal positionalities and multiple identities of not only researchers, but also participants themselves during an ethnographic journey. So I hope I was able to provide you some things to inspire you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to discuss with you. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention. And here are some of the works I mobilized for this presentation. And I could share it with the students of this master program. And thank you again for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Asuncion. Thank you very much for this very clear presentation, very rich, very interesting, which sets the floor for our whole lecture series, where we will come back on several points that you've already raised in your introductory lecture. So I think it's very, very interesting to start now with this food for thoughts. So now we have a large number of students and faculty members online.